to kind of ask or start out with a question, I guess, and that is, how many of you have taken part in a pity party? See a show of hands? Okay. How many of you are Golden State Warrior fans here? Okay, well, those two should actually go together because this week I got word that LeBron James, of course, is with the Los Angeles Lakers, and him and the Los Angeles Lakers took on the Golden State Warriors, and I believe the score was 123 to 113. Now, I was looking up the minutes that LeBron played, and I calculated that if he had played the full game, he would have had 20 assists, 40 rebounds, and 60 points. Now, given that this is a preseason game, there was one expert who calculated and said that if this had been a regular season game, that it would have been 40 assists, he would have had 80 rebounds, and he would have had 120 points. So with that kind of news, I want you to, to have your pity party. I must say, too, that I only found out last night that they played them a second time. And the good news is that, Steph Curry was playing. Name a couple other players. Draymond Green, is it? Okay, and who's that other? Okay, Klay Thompson, yeah, and then, I don't know, you guys know all the players. Anyways, those three I know for sure were playing. And the other good news is that LeBron wasn't playing. The bad news is Golden State lost again, and by a bigger margin this time. But the good news is that they've already set up the finals. It's going to be the Toronto Raptors versus the Los Angeles Lakers, and so I am looking forward to that. So that will definitely not be a pity party. But in thinking, I'm not here to give a pity party for the Golden State Warriors. I think there are other things happening in your lives that can make for pity parties. Has anyone ever done an SAT here? Okay, a few of you. I'm sure that you might have had a pity party over trying to study for that. And any kind of test. Have any of you had to apply for a visa in the United States? Okay, I tell you, that is a pity party, trying to work through those visas. There's over 187 different visas that the government issues in the United States, and I constantly talk with students or people who are working at some of these different places where they have internships, and they're constantly worrying, and of course, if they get denied or something happens or there's a delay, it's easy to go into a pity party. For others here, if you drive here in this area and anywhere in the Silicon Valley, you know what it's like. I was driving behind not an Uber, actually it was a Google driverless car, and it stopped at a yellow light. Like, what car in this area stops at a yellow light? So I nearly rear-ended it, and then I realized with all its gadgets hooked up and, it's getting its readings from the satellites that it was the driverless Google car. But I mean, that's not the only kind of driving that I take pity on. There's also, I've learned that your cars here in California are not equipped with turn signals. I rarely see a turn signal exist here. And also, I don't know which one that is. Is that San Tomas Expressway over there? San Tomas. Okay, San Tomas Expressway. Well, I've figured out that if you want to drive or navigate that course, it seems like a race course, safely, what you do is you aim for the middle of your car down the middle of the line, because if you try to keep your car, most cars do not keep like in between those two lines, right? So take pity there too. But in thinking about life, we all have those times when we have pity parties, and I'm defining pity as the self-pity, when you're worried and concerned about yourself. You're feeling sorry for yourself. And so this morning, I didn't want to leave us with how to have a pity party, because for most of you here, you've had at least one pity party in your lifetime, and if you're me, you've become an expert. But I wanted you to learn how to crash a pity party. So if you have your outlines here, one of the background scriptures I'm going to give you is from 1 Kings chapter 21. But to get a real sense of what's going on here, we're going to look at the first expert. He's a pity party crasher, and he's a former king of Israel, and his name is Ahab. We learn about him actually way before chapter 21, but I want to kind of focus on chapter 20 first. And in this chapter 20, and I'll just give you kind of a synopsis, but there was a king named Ben-Hadad, and he was a Syrian king. And so he decided that he was going to attack Ahab. And Ahab at this time, he was a king of Israel. You might remember that Israel split up and that there was 10 tribes in the north and 2 in the south. The 10 were called Israel to the north, and the 2 in the south were called Judah. So he was ruling over the northern kingdom at the time, and he was stationed in Samaria. His father, Omri, was quite an evil king, and God said in his word that there was no other king that was evil as him. And yet when Ahab, his son, became king, once again the scripture said that there wasn't anyone as evil as him. So we have that background, knowing that he's, we're not dealing with a very good man in terms of Ahab. But nevertheless, this Ben-Hadad, I can barely pronounce his name, and he's actually probably Ben-Hadad the second, because in chapter 15 of 1 Kings, there's another Ben-Hadad. So that's why a lot of scholars think he's Ben-Hadad the second. Nevertheless, he decides he's going to attack them. But he gives Ahab some warning, and he says, I want to take the best of your wives, the best of your children, and your silver and your gold. And I was actually thinking about this last night, and I thought, I wonder why... and actually, I better back up by saying, so Ahab says, yeah, okay, you can basically go ahead and do this. I'll give you the best of the wives, best of the children, and my silver and my gold. And I was thinking, now, what kind of a relationship did he have with his wife, Jezebel, which you'll find out a little bit more about her. Because when I was married, before my wife passed away, I thought my wife was the best wife in the world. And I still think that to this day, unless something changes that. And my kids are the best kids in the world. I have 2 daughters, and I thank God for both of them. And I thought, I wonder if Ahab didn't have that kind of relationship, because why would he be willing to give up his wife and his kids? But nevertheless, we find out that, these messengers that were sent from Ben-Hadad, they go back, and then Ben-Hadad has another message for King Ahab, and he says this next time, he says, well, actually, I want all your children and all your wives. We're going to just take whoever we want, and your silver and your gold. Now, this time, it seems like Ahab's upset. So, like I say, maybe there's a correlation there. I'm not sure. But nevertheless, he's upset, and he has some elders who consult with him and say, you shouldn't go through with this plan. Don't give up all of this. And so Ahab sends back a message once again to Ben-Hadad and says that, that he shouldn't think that he's just going to go ahead and run over us or anything like that. He better rethink what's happening here. And, you hear the phrase, don't count your chickens before they're hatched? That kind of an idea. So anyways, Ben-Hadad sends a third message this time, and basically he says that he's going to obliterate Samaria, that he's going to wipe it out. And so there ends up being a battle, and at this battle, it turns out that Ahab actually is victorious. They're able to defeat Ben-Hadad. And so things are looking a little better. However, Ben-Hadad figures that the reason they lost is because Samaria is kind of where they fought was on a hill. And so they figured that Ahab's God is God of the hills. And so they thought, let's have a battle that's down in the valley or in the plain. And once we have the battle there, we should be able to defeat them because, our chariots and our horses, they don't have to go uphill. We can fight a lot better where it's flat. And so they set up this battle. And in the meantime, of course, God sends a prophet. And the prophet tells Ahab that they're going to be victorious and that the people will know that God is also God of the hills, and, of course, he's God of the plains and the valleys. And so Ahab ends up having this battle, and he has victory in this battle. So that was really good at that point. However, Ben-Hadad makes one mistake, and that is instead of following God's command and completely wiping out all the Syrian army, he decides to keep Ben-Hadad, the actual king. And so another prophet is sent by God to Ahab and says, basically, listen up, because your life is going to be taken because you didn't take the life of Ben-Hadad. And actually, other lives are going to be taken as a result of your sin and what you did. And so we find at the end of chapter 20, it says, and the king of Israel went to his house, vexed and sullen, and then he came back to Samaria from this battle. Or this time. So anyways, so here he is. He's vexed and sullen. He's upset. He's kind of depressed because he thought, I thought everything was cool, but now I'm hearing from this prophet that things aren't quite right. A little bit of time passed, and we find in chapter 1 that now Ahab is in a place called Jezreel. It's not too far from his other palace. And while he's there, he's looking out, and I guess he figured, you know what, I need to have a nice garden beside my palace. And this wasn't uncommon for kings. When they had different battles, they would go out and collect different plants and trees and different things and have them planted wherever their palace was or near their palace. And so he sets forth to take over the land that was owned by a fellow named Naboth. However, Naboth is a follower of God, and there is, in the old laws when you go back to the laws of Moses, there was laws set up such that the people of Israel couldn't give up their land freely. And so now Naboth tells him that he's not going to give up the land. Ahab, says, well, I'll give you money, I'll give you new land, but Naboth still insists that, no, this isn't going to take place. And so as the story goes, Ahab returns to his house, and we pick it up that, I guess this is in verse 6. He says, and Ahab went into his house, once again, vexed and sullen in my translation, because of what Naboth the Jezreelite had said to him. For he had said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. And so we find Ahab lays down in his bed, and he turns away his face and would eat no food. Now, the end of the story doesn't end there. Like, he's having a really bad pity party. But remember, I mentioned that Ahab had a wife, and her name is Jezebel, and she's become synonymous with all that is evil. If you have studied the ancient Near East, you might know that the god of Baal is a storm god, and also there's a god of Ashtoreth, which is kind of the female goddess of fertility, and she's also a war goddess. And so this Jezebel had been serving these gods, and God never approved of the marriage between Ahab and Jezebel, because the Jews were not, or the people of Israel were not supposed to marry with people of other nations when they're serving false gods. And it was definitely clear she was serving a false god. So anyway, she concocts a plan whereby she's going to send a letter to Naboth, have him come to basically a banquet, and while there, she's going to set up to have him killed, like for treason. And so that's exactly what takes place. And so then, of course, Ahab is now happy because he can take over the garden. But not to be outdone by this, of course, God is going to now come and speak to Ahab. And he uses Elijah the prophet. And so Elijah tells him that what he's done is evil and that there's going to be a consequence. In fact, if you want to read later on in chapter 21, you can hear about how he's going to die and his wife is going to die and the dogs are going to lick up his blood and her blood. Like, it's really pretty gruesome. At this point, after hearing this, Ahab decides to do something, and this is one of the ways to get over a pity party, and that's he decides to repent. And so I believe that repenting is one of the key tips in terms of trying to overcome a pity party. And so I was thinking to myself, and I didn't really want to share this one. I had written out another illustration for my life. I was thinking of a time when I had a massive pity party, and I was forced to repent. And it goes back to the year 2010. I don't know if anyone is young enough here, or old enough, to remember the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver. Anyone be able to? Okay, we got one person. You're pretty old then. Good. Okay, so you remember, at least you follow the Olympics. But the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, were held in Vancouver, BC, and also Whistler. And at that time, I really wanted to go to the Olympics, but there was one catch. For the opening ceremony ticket, it was $4,000. That was like for the spot where you could barely see what was going on in our stadium. So it just so happened that one of the students I worked with, his dad buys and sells tickets. So when they had a parent-teacher interview, even though I was a youth worker, I made sure that I could talk with his dad. So I had a conversation. I told him about this dream of wanting to go to the opening ceremonies. I mean, how often do the Olympics come to your city and you get to take part in this? And so anyways, he told me that it was unlikely that he could get me a ticket any cheaper than what the opening ceremony tickets were going for. And he said, in fact, they were probably going to be increased in that most of them are already sold out. But he did say, if you volunteer, you can get in for free. So why don't you do that? So there was, I think there was over 20,000 applicants, and they ended up, I think, with about 10,000 volunteers. But out of those different volunteer positions, there were some real prime ones. The one is, of course, if you're going to do the Olympics, you want to carry the flag in, right? That would be like the coolest thing to do. Well, of course, the only way to do that was to be an athlete marshal. And so they were going to have 200 athlete marshals. And amongst those athlete marshals, they were going to select either one or two people to carry in the flag, for the Olympic flag, that is. And so I applied for the athlete marshal position. The only conditions is that one, you had to be a good singer, and two, you had to be a good dancer. So I remembered that in grade 4, I was in a choir. And we sang the Uki Luki song. How many of you sang the Uki Luki song? Is it a mandatory down here? Good, one person, yes. Because you remember the lyrics. It goes, we throw our nets out into the sea, and all the Uki Lukis come swimming to me. And we're going to Uki land. Uki, 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 Uki land. Okay, so you can tell why I'm not on the worship team. But anyway, so I had that. And then a dancing part, I remember in grade 12, we have in Canada, you're required to take physical education as part of your high school. Do you have to do it down here in grade 12? You could choose to do it. Well, you have no choice in Canada, okay? You have to take grade 12 PE. And so I remember I did square dancing. In fact, I remember one girl that whenever I swung her around, her hands were so sweaty, she would always slide off of me. So it was like, I don't know if she did that on purpose. She didn't like me or what. But anyways, that was my dancing skills. So I had those 2 skills down and applied. And lo and behold, the Lord blessed me. I got the position. But the good news is not only was I the poor one, or like really poor at doing the dancing and singing, but there was quite a few others who were like me. And so it ended up that NBC, who were in charge of the Winter Olympics that year, when they noticed that our skills were a bit lacking and our choreographer was getting really frustrated with us, they decided to limit our singing and limit our dancing, which was good, to a few simple moves that I was really happy about. So then came the time we were down to our last practice before a rehearsal, and we were doing it now at that time it's called BC Place Stadium. It was one of the largest stadiums, like with a covered roof at the time. And so there we are, we're going through the camera angles were not going to be as good if we, with our little section standing up, and to put us to the other side. So instead of being in spot number 3, I was at the front, I was now spot number 3 at the back. And I tell you, I had a massive pity party, and I was actually quite angry at this person who had changed it. And I kind of voiced my displeasure and said, why are we changing it now? This is crazy and stuff. But anyways, afterwards, when I got home, God convicted me and said, I'm not going to be any kind of a witness to that fella if I'm having this pity party. And that I should just be thankful that I could even take part in the opening ceremonies of the Olympic, and actually was going to be in the closing ceremonies as well. And so that night I repented of my pity party syndrome, as I would call it, and it was really good. And I actually went and apologized to that fella. But I think that was a breakthrough for me, because God allowed me to hand out gospel books to the main producer, who had also done a previous Olympics, his assistant, and also the lady who was doing the choreography. And also, of course, I'd been sharing my faith with a few people that were also athlete marshals. And then at the end, in the closing ceremony, what I was doing is, because we got to hang out with the athletes and the singers for the closing ceremonies, they just had us kind of dancing around in the main part of it. And so what I decided to do was to have athletes sign a shirt that I had. Like, it was just a white shirt. It was part of our choreography. And then I told them that I would pray for them. And so it was really cool, because I had different athletes from different parts of the world. There was a couple that didn't want to do it, and that was fine, and a few were hesitant. But it was really exciting just to be able to share a little bit of my faith. And so I was thankful to God that I did the repenting. And so my challenge for you this morning is, if you're having one of those kind of pity parties, sometimes the best thing to do is just repent. Just ask God, for forgiveness, and then you can move on in life. The second tip I'd like to give you is, it's actually from the life of Elijah. And in this one, I'm going to call it the pity party crash tip number 2 of returning. I was kind of debating on this, whether I was going to use returning or restoring. Like, you can go either way. But we have to actually turn back a few chapters to the life of Elijah. And it is in chapter 17, I believe, here. It starts, it kind of starts in 17 and then goes into 18. The start of 17 is, you see a number of different miracles that Elijah does. He comes to that widow, and he prays, and there's food that's delivered for them, and this is a time of famine. And then, of course, God raises through him the widow's son from the dead. And then finally, when we get to chapter 18, we see that Elijah confronts Ahab. And this confrontation, I believe it's Pastor, you had shared a message not too long ago. It's the one where he faces the prophets of Baal. I think there was about 450, and then there was the ones of Ashtoreth, who were about 400. And he has this test where the prophets of Baal, to see which one is God, the prophets of Baal put some wood on the ground, and then they slay one bull. And then from morning till about noontime, they're dancing around, they're praying to their false god, hoping that this sacrifice will be consumed. And then at around midday, Elijah says to them, well, maybe he's just musing, or he needs to relieve himself, this God of yours, or perhaps he's on a journey, or maybe he's asleep and you need to wake him up. So then these prophets, they get more intense. They start actually cutting themselves. The blood is pouring out, and still this sacrifice there is not consumed. And so at this point then, Elijah calls all the people to himself, and he sets up 12 stones. He kind of restores an altar that had been made from a prior time. And then he sets the wood, and he puts the sacrifice on top. He had actually built a trench around. And then he asked for 4 buckets of water to be put on top of it, and then another 4, and then another 4. And the whole trench is all filled up with water. And then, of course, he prays to God and asks for God to reveal himself, to show that he is the true God. And you know the story for most of you is that sacrifice was consumed, and then Elijah had those prophets slayed. And so it was an incredible experience for Elijah. But then in the next chapter, when we get to chapter 19, we find that Ahab tells Jezebel, his wife, what had happened, how all these prophets had been slain. And so she gets really upset, and we find in verse 2, she sends a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." And if you continue to read the story, you find out that Elijah runs for his life. In fact, he runs about 120 miles. And while he's there, at the place where he arrives, he sits down under a broom tree, it's called, or I'm not sure the other type of name it's called in Hebrew. But anyways, he's under this particular tree, and he's really despondent. He doesn't want to eat. He's tired. And God reveals himself again. God reveals himself through an angel that tells him, to get up, to feed himself. We continue to see that at this point, Elijah isn't quite over his pity party. He goes and he hides himself in a cave, and God comes to him through a different series of events, through earthquake and wind and fire. And then finally, God reveals himself to Elijah and tells him to get up and to return. And so when I was thinking about a pity party, sometimes God tells us to return. He'll tell us to return to the hard place that we've been before sometimes, to return back to what he's called us. And God certainly had called Elijah, and he's called each one of us. And there may be times along our path or journey when we get discouraged and we want to give up, but we have to continue on. We have to return to the Lord. We have to just return to that journey that he's called us to. And I had one of those experiences in my life where it seemed like with my seniority in my job, there isn't too many that do my job. And whenever there was, in Canada that is, working in the school system, that whenever there was pay cuts, I would always be the one who seemed to be, their position would be cut, and then I would lose my seniority. And so it turned out, after having this glorious job at the high school where I was working with alternate students within the high school, it was a really cool program. I was seeing God do a lot of change in the lives of these young people, that I found out that there was going to be, actually, in this case, it wasn't going to be a cut, but somebody was coming off a maternity leave and would bump me out of my position. So there wasn't a lot of options. The only option was I was going to have to return back to an elementary school that I had worked at a long time previously. And so when I returned there and I met with the principal, I thought, I'm going to probably work with behavior of the grades 4 and 5s. But he said, no, you're actually going to work with kindergarten and grade 1 students. And I thought, oh, no, great. And not only that, he said, and you're going to do lunchtime supervision. You'll got to take care of the soccer when these kids play soccer. And I thought, what's that all about? Well, I quickly learned, first of all, with the kindergarten kids, it's like a big wave when they play soccer, so you can't even see the soccer ball. Like, there is no passing. It's just like it goes forward, and they'll go even through the net, and it'll happen the other direction. So I just basically made sure that they tried to run in a straight line and not, run into the fence or injure themselves that way. But then when it came to the grade ones, who sometimes incorporated the grade twos, it was a lot different. These kids would be kicking and screaming. They're like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, whatever you call them, experts, kickboxing, MMA, everything. And that was just the girls. The guys actually were pretty easy going. They would just argue, but the girls. So once I got the girls to learn how to play soccer appropriately, then I started focusing on the guys, the grade one students. And there was one student in particular named Jack. And I remember him because I believe he was from either the Caribbean or maybe from Africa. I'm not sure, but he had no front teeth. And he was a little bit of a character, but an excellent soccer player. So he tended to control the game, which was okay at times. But we do want to, I was teaching that you do have to be kind to the others and be passing the ball and just not hog the ball yourself. So anyways, there came a point where these kids came running up to me, and they said that, Jack is swearing at me. Jack is swearing at me. And there was more than one kid. There were several of these kids. So I thought, okay, well, I better bring Jack over, and we're going to have to deal with this. So I brought Jack over, and I said to the kids, tell Jack what's going on, like how you're feeling. And so they, some of the kids were crying and everything. And so they were telling them how they didn't appreciate the fact that he was swearing and stuff. So anyways, I thought, well, okay, just if I could get you just to step aside for a minute, I want to talk to Jack. And so I said to Jack, I said, I don't know why I asked this, but I thought I'd better anyways. I said, what swear word are you using, by the way? And he said, chicken. I'm calling them chicken. And so I thought, well, thank the Lord it's only chicken. So I could deal with that. So anyways, I brought the group back, and I said to Jack, I said, maybe we'll just hold off on the word chicken, okay? You can see how it's upsetting them. So anyways, I tell that story because I actually ended up having fun at this job. It turned out to be a really good job. And so sometimes when we're patient with God and, we trust him and we return to even the hard places, and sometimes the places we don't want to go, that God will bless us. It could be even for you, if God's, for some of you students too, that when you have choices between universities, maybe ask God, which one could I serve you at the best? I remember I had that choice when I was going to go to Bible school. I had originally come down here to San Francisco. I was going to attend Golden Gate Seminary over at Mill Valley. My wife had also, that's where my wife and I had kind of really, I fell in love with her first, but that's kind of like our history was there and everything, and I promised her I was going to take her out twice a week to the fine restaurants. I had all these plans and everything, but instead, God in his, I was going to say humor, but in his mercy maybe, he ended up taking me to Cochrane, Alberta, to a Bible school there that would have maybe 5-degree weather. It was really cold. I remember I dropped my keys one time, or my books, and I put my keys in my mouth, and my keys stuck to my lips. Yeah, it was very painful. However, the good news is that the house key had not stuck to my lips, so I was able to go back to the house, open it up, and then got warm water, and I didn't tear my skin off, which was good. But anyways, God will do that in your life. So just remember then to just be patient with God and ask for him and his ways and return to whatever might be the hard place. The final one is the story of the former lame man in Israel. And this tip is kind of a unique one in some ways. And if you turn to John chapter 5, you'll probably also recognize this as a very familiar story. It's about the man at the pool of Siloam. And at that particular pool, there was a certain season in which angels would come and they would stir up the water. And then whoever was lame or blind or ill, whoever stepped in first, they would be healed. And so we find that there's this lame man there. He had been ill or lame for 38 years. We don't know the exact type of illness or exactly what was going on with him. But he had been a long time in that condition. And so Jesus comes to him and he asks him a very simple question. Do you want to be healed? And I was thinking about this. What would you say if Jesus were to come up to you today and said, do you want to be healed? What would your answer be? Yeah, of course, or yes. Yeah, even one word. Yes, that's what I would have thought. But no, it's actually like it's almost as if he's in a pity party mood. He says, so Jesus asks him in verse 6, do you want to be healed? And the sick man answered, "Oh, sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm going, another steps down before me." And then, of course, Jesus is really cool. And this is probably one of my favorite things about Jesus, is when he heals people even when they don't ask for it. And so he tells the guy to get up, take up his pallet, and walk. And, it's so cool that Jesus did that. And, of course, when we read the story later, after this man is interrogated by the Pharisees and stuff, that Jesus found him in the temple. And I was thinking that if I'm going to the temple, I'm going there to rejoice. I mean, that's the place you would want to go in the first century. And so that's where Jesus finds the lame man. And so for us, in thinking of this last kind of party crasher tip of rejoicing, I was thinking back to my own life, in terms of those times where, I fall into a pity party. But if I take time to reflect, I can think of that verse which I asked as your memory verse there, which is, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his love endures forever," because he does do credible and wonderful things. What I didn't tell you, and I forgot at the start, is that when I was researching this, I came across 24.3 million Google hits on how to set up a pity party. And of that 24.3 million, I was figuring if I spent 1 minute on each one of those tips, it would have taken me just over the age of 100 to complete it. However, I was in good stead because on the very first page that I checked out, they were actually hosting, on the same day that I looked at it, a pity party in San Francisco. And I thought, wow, this is cool. I can actually go to a pity party. They were going to play the saddest music. They were going to have the saddest videos. And I thought, this is going to be great for this message. So I go there, and and I was expecting the saddest music, the saddest video. And when I got there, there was actually no music playing, and there wasn't any video. They had comedy. And actually, there was 4 acts in a row of the comedy. Now, in some ways, the comedy, I did almost want to have a pity party. It wasn't really that funny. But then they did afterwards. They actually started into the pity party, and they were showing some videos, and they had some music. And I actually stayed there for about an hour just watching some of this stuff. Some of the videos I hadn't seen. Some were really retro from the 80s and 90s, so I could remember, had a lot of memories of some of those songs. And this fellow sat beside me named Sean, and Sean was actually the organizer of this event. And, I don't know how, but I thought, well, before I leave, I think God brought me here for a reason. So I was sitting there thinking, what could I do to try to talk to this guy? Like, what could I possibly start a conversation about? And anyways, what happened is there was a fellow behind the counter, and he was wanting certain music, like he wanted to skip a song. There was a song he didn't like. And the party organizer said, no, actually, he said, I'm going to change it to what I want. And so he went into the back and he changed it. And the first song I think he changed it was to Lifehouse. And Lifehouse is a group that, even though the main singer, he doesn't claim to be writing Christian songs, he is a Christian, it comes out in the lyrics. And then the next song that came on was Chris Daughtry. Is that how you pronounce it? He was, I think he was a runner-up in the American Idol. And he also, if you listen to mainstream Christian music, he's on there too. And I thought, well, if that's not a sign that I should talk to the guy, then what is, right? And so I started, and I said to the guy, I said, you'll never believe this, but I actually came here to do a sermon or a speech on a pity party and stuff. And he was kind of intrigued about that. And then I asked him a little bit about what he did, because I thought he was the owner of the place. And he said, no, he just sets up this event, this pity party event. And I said, well, what do you really like to do? And he said, well, I like to actually play ukuleles. And I thought, well, that's really interesting, because that same day I'd gone with a Bible study group to Japantown, and we were going to tour the Japanese museum that was there, and then afterwards eat some Japanese food. But because I got there early, I was walking around Japantown, and I came across a ukulele shop, and I actually took a picture because I was planning to send it back to my daughter, because my daughter had lived in Hawaii, and she loves ukuleles. And so I pulled out my phone and I showed him a picture. I said, well, wouldn't you believe it that I just happened to take a picture of ukuleles? And he thought, wow, this is really interesting, man. Cool. So then we had more of a conversation, found out a little bit more about him. And he told me of an upcoming event where he was going to speak some poetry and different things. So I checked out his website. And when I checked out his website, I found out that his grandfather had died actually 3 days before this event. And that actually he had been experiencing a lot of depression and different things. And so I sent him kind of a consoling message and talked about Jesus in the message and kind of left it at that. Fast forward another 2 weeks, and when I was up in Canada last time, I was telling somebody about this message that I was going to be sharing about a pity party and stuff, and said I met this guy there that, who is a kind of a poet guy and had set it up and different things. And so I went to his website. And when I went to the website or whatever, or his Facebook page, I couldn't believe it. And I'll just read it here for a second. I'll just get it up here. Might take 1 second here. So I was looking, and he had this message that said, the self-realization of being trash. And he did a little picture of it. And now, prior to this guy has thousands of people following him, he does. And when I had seen some of the different ones, I mean, some of these were really eclectic, interesting groups, some of the finest tattoos I'd ever seen. But anyways, the very first person to respond to this, his idea of thinking himself as trash, said, God doesn't see anyone as trash. The next person said, God got you, nephew. You just have to trust and believe. Then there was the next one who said, after that, God will take care of you. Don't worry at all. Jesus said, for he so loved the world, he also loves you. Because his Father made you out of clay. He's the potter, or the lump of clay. Get it? It's the Bible. Love you lots. Then the next one says, you know how I know you're important is because I'm up in Canada celebrating Thanksgiving, and someone asked if I met anyone at the pity party, and I said I met you. And when I read these posts, I know that God knew you while you were in your mother's womb. Who knows or now cares for you and has a plan for your life, has not changed in his love for you. Your challenge is to adjust your life to the calling he has given you, and I'll keep you in my prayers. And then the next person after that said, Jesus, will you make a way? Yes, sir, sure will. Jigs, watch and see, Lamo. The next one said, can you sing Jesus loves me, this I know? I remember you singing it as a little boy. It's still true. And so I just thought that was so cool that God is reaching out to this guy. Like I was wondering, who's sharing the gospel, and I never expected that. There's actually a number of people who are investing in his life, and it's like just all of a sudden this tidal wave. And so in closing, I hadn't expected that I was going to offer a prayer up for Sean. I am going to do that, but there's actually some cards there right behind Jojo, and I'd like you to pass out at least, let's say, 3 cards per person. So everybody take a card. And the reason you can actually pass them out. Yeah, those are the cards there. And so every person take 3 cards. There are actually some felts there as well. I didn't have any pens available. But if you actually open this up, your paper, you're going to see 2 individuals there. When I came down, not this from the Thanksgiving plane ride, because I went up to visit my daughters up in Canada on Thanksgiving, but the plane ride prior to that, when I had to do some paperwork up in Canada, never seems to end, but I think I'm finally finished with all my paperwork, having left Canada. I came across, there was an empty seat on the plane beside me. Usually when I take the flight down, the plane is completely full. But for this particular flight, the middle seat was open. I was in the aisle seat, and so I was thinking, this is great, Lord. Like, I can actually rest and relax. I don't have to worry about who's sitting beside me. And so the plane was just about ready to get for its takeoff when, lo and behold, 2 ladies walk in to the plane, and you know what happens next. One of them sits down beside me, and I thought, okay, well, I guess there's a reason that this seat was taken now. So I began a conversation with her. I was telling her a little bit about who I was, and then she started to share with me a little bit about her story. And her story, and her name is Erin, is she was telling me that about her son, Chad, who was in collegiate hockey, and he had suffered a shoulder injury, and so they started to treat him with pain medication, but the reality was he had got addicted to that, and it ended up affecting or changed his life, that particular addiction. And as a result of that, he ended up dying at 21 years of age. And so she was coming down to San Francisco to just trying to get away from just a lot of that memory. And not only her, but her friend. And her friend, Lori, her daughter had been, it's going to be coming up 10 years, had been missing. And so her daughter has a twin sister, and, this is going back to October 18th, 2008, it was. And so the 2 of them, of course, are doing this journey together. I'm not saying that they were full of self-pity, but if anyone could feel or have pity for themselves, I'm sure that these 2 could do it. Whether Erin, in terms of, with her son having died so tragically, and then with, with Amber being missing. As a parent, I have 2 daughters. I can't imagine one of my daughters being missing. So over the course of time, I actually, on my days off, I went and toured them around San Francisco, and then it was time for them to leave back for Portage La Prairie. And on the way back, Erin stopped in New York to see a friend, and then I got a text from her that she had accepted Jesus Christ. Like the weekend together, and also she had gone to a church in San Francisco, it had changed her life. Like she could no longer not trust in Jesus. And so since then, it's been really exciting because she's become so passionate about Jesus. She even wants to change her name to Grace, just to show what's happening. Her parents can't figure out what's happened to her. She doesn't have any more bitterness towards her son. She's also setting up a foundation for her son. She's asked me to come speak, and in faith, I'm going to be going there this coming Thursday to Winnipeg, Manitoba. And fortunately, it's not snowing right now, which I thank the Lord for. But and also, Lori doesn't know that I'm coming. I mean, she had invited me, but we're going to surprise her because there's also on the same day, there's a vigil. And so what I'd like you to do is I actually would like to take some cards to them, to Lori and to Erin. And if you want to put in brackets Grace, because I think Erin's going to change her name to Grace. I'll know the next time I get an email. If she puts Grace, then that's absolutely for sure. But she seemed really serious. But she just felt like God has done so much in her life, and she wants to learn so much about Jesus. Part of this trip, too, is that she can feel comfortable about sharing Jesus with her family. She has a daughter named Kaylee, and she has a boyfriend from Zimbabwe, and he has a friend from Zimbabwe. And so it's really cool to see how that's all working. And as for Lori, it's been really hard for her, but in the emails or the texts that I've had ongoing with her, she's so thankful for the prayer. She could not believe it, some different people that have been praying for her, and I haven't told her yet of you praying for her. So, but what I'd like on those cards is to put your favorite Bible verse, a verse that really means a lot. If you want to do one just for Erin, that's fine. You can, like I say, put brackets Grace, or if you decide to put Grace, that's fine. And for Lori, the mother. So those are the only 2 I met, and they're the only 2 that have given me permission to pray for them. And so I haven't met Scott yet. I haven't met Erin's, the father of Chad, who's Ryan. I haven't met Kaylee. I haven't met the twin sister, Ashley, of Amber yet. I'm looking forward to meeting them all, and I don't know where they stand spiritually. The only one I know that's a Christian is Erin. So for her, if you could give like a verse of encouragement, if you want to write a little note to her, that's fine. For Lori, it would just be to help her. She's still grieving. They don't know what's going to happen in terms of with her daughter. Are they going to find her or not? I mean, my prayer is that they'll find her. And then the third card, which I wasn't expecting to do today, but I'd like you to do one for Sean. I want to meet up with him, and I want to let him know. I'm going to let him know after the service that he was prayed for. And so his name is spelled S-H-A-U-N, and I'm looking forward because I believe that God, it was not an accident that I met him, and God's going to do something great. And then finally, and you don't have to complete them all now. I know we're going to have a time of fellowship shortly, and I can always gather them then. But this week, I'd like you to get your own card, or if you have a prayer journal, I gave the Timothy youth and Titus youth journals. I got extra ones for the Timothy or Titus who weren't there. And to maybe just write in your prayer journal of one person that, you can pray a scripture into their life. Maybe it's a Christian that is having a pity party, and you can encourage them. Maybe it's somebody who's not a Christian. They don't have the hope that we have in Jesus Christ, and that's the hope when I go this week. I'm asking that God will use my life in a powerful, powerful way. In my 45 years of being a Christian, I just feel like there's going to be something absolutely incredible happen. I don't know what it's going to be, but I believe God's going to do that. He's doing so much that I can't contain the blessings. Even last night, I'd be meeting with students from UC of Santa Cruz, and we're meeting Monday for a Bible study, and the one guy says, I'm going to bring a Peruvian this time. Now, the group consists of somebody, from a couple from China, there's a Japanese fella, and then there's Taiwanese, and so now we'll have a Peruvian. And so it's neat how God's making it international, but I just thank God, I'm not even inviting these people. God's bringing the people, and they're even inviting their own friends. And so I'm so excited by what God's doing. It's hard to contain the excitement. I don't know, like I say, what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to be great. This has just happened because God put this into my path. For each of you here, you don't know what God's going to do. You just have to trust him. Even tonight, 2 weeks ago, or a week ago, I had my roommate brought his cousin in, and this uncle or whatever, his nephew plays for the Anaheim Ducks. It's Troy Terry. He got on the first line, and so they drove all the way one drove from Colorado, the other from Arizona to watch this game. And I was thinking afterwards, because they stayed overnight at our place, I never shared Jesus with them, and I felt like a little bit guilty over that. But my roommate says, oh, by the way, they're coming to stay tonight. I just found this out last night. And I said, well, great, because I thought this will give me an opportunity to share. And maybe at some point I can meet this hockey player, and I'd love to be able to share Jesus with Troy. But anyways, God does such great things. When all he's asking us to do, and this is the ultimate pity party tip I could give you, is that just be fully devoted to Jesus Christ. If you do that, you will not have to worry about these pity parties. And so to kind of end today, I'd like to end in prayer. And I know that for some of you, you may not pray very often, or maybe you haven't prayed at all. And I understand if you don't have a relationship with God, I would encourage you to pray to God, to ask him to reveal himself to you if you've never followed God or never known about Jesus Christ. There's people here that be willing to share who Jesus is with you, and we would love to do that. But for those of you who know Jesus Christ, what I'd like you to do is to maybe get in groups of 2 or 3, and I'd like you to pray for each one of these. I'd like you to pray for the family of Chad, who's passed away, for his mom, Erin, who's trying to set up this foundation. She wants to help young people so that they won't experience something like what her son experienced, that they know that they can have help for their mental health or for addictions. And then to pray for Amber's family, to pray for her mom, Lori, who, I can't wait to tell her that the other half of the story, that when we know Jesus Christ, that we can have that hope and we can have that assurance. And then for Sean, as far as I know, I don't think Sean's a Christian. He definitely, he's not thinking very highly of himself. And so I would pray that perhaps that God will change his life. And so if you could do that in groups of 3, and then I'll pray, and then we're going to close the service. So just get into group 2s and 3s. And also, if there's somebody that God puts on your mind that maybe they're having a pity party experience and they need some help, or somebody like that, feel welcome to pray as a group also.